All right, welcome to the Voice of San Diego, June 22nd. That's Monday. Voice of San Diego at home. It's Father's Day emeritus. That's right. Let's put this up. It's June 22nd, 2020. A lot of twos. Doing our best. I hope everybody had a good Father's Day. I had a good Father's Day. I was able to, they let me surf in the morning. And then we went out and I actually was able to catch a spotted bay bass on Mission Bay, my first spotty as they're called. And so very stoked about that. I let him go. It wasn't quite regulation. I wasn't prepared to murder a fish. I was just trying to prove my superiority, I guess, just catch one. But no, it was a sporting day, nice day to get out. My kids were great and everybody was happy. So shouldn't have a very long show today. Going to go through some things we found out and some things you might care about. Also willing to take any of your questions. Voice of San Diego, of course, has a two-part mission. One is to investigate, and our reporters out there every day investigating, asking for public records. Right now, we're in a real heated fight with this, with one agency at least, trying to get some records out. Hope to have a positive resolution soon from that. So our reporters go and do that. And then on the other side, we do a lot of explanatory work. We kind of feel like we're best suited to provide a lot of explanation. There's thousands more people engaged in local politics, local public affairs, education, and obviously public health issues right now. And we're trying to provide an way for them to get plugged in to understand how things work. I believe personally, complexity is a form of elitism. It's how it's not necessarily deliberate, but it certainly does create elitism when you're able to understand all these questions, what the county's doing, what the Board of Supervisors are, what the local agency formation committee is, what all of these agencies are and what they do. That is a form of elitism, to be able to understand what they're doing, follow what they're doing. And so we're trying to make sure people can follow that as well. And we've got our hands full today. So if you have any questions at all at any time about how things work, if I can't answer it, we'll put it to our reporters and see what we can figure out. Let's go through some news. You might have seen our story last week about Metropolitan Transit System. The Metropolitan Transit System Board voted right after that story came out Thursday to take more aggressive steps to reduce the burden of fare evasion tickets. Let me just pull this over here so they were going to do some things, but they wanted to reduce the burden even more than initially proposed by the agency just a few days ago. So our story came out, and then they made this move. Our story analyzed just 1 week. This was Lisa Halverstadt. Just 1 week last year, she decided to take a week in June after she heard about some issues with MTS enforcement. MTS, of course, is the board, or is the agency that does transit in San Diego, in parts of East County, and in South Bay, not North County. That's the North County Transit District. And so North County Transit District and MTS, the Sandag guy says they should merge, but they're separate. So MTS, we decided to look at enforcement statistics from just 1 week, exactly a year ago. That was June in 2019. Metropolitan Transit System officers wrote nearly 1,500 fare evasion citations during that period. Our analysis found 86% of those remain unpaid and unresolved even a year later. Virtually all of those unpaid tickets were referred to the Superior Court and to debt collectors. So what began as a $75 ticket becomes a $500 ticket and then ruins people's credit. A lot of people who are homeless are already very poor. Fascinating story from Lisa Halverstadt. I recommend you check that out at voiceofsandiego.org. And then that development on Thursday. So not only did they decide to reduce some of the fines, they also decided to do a pilot diversion program that would let people pay within 120 days. And there will be also options for community service if they can't afford the ticket. And at Councilwoman Monica Montgomery's urging, the board also directed MTS staff to develop a plan to establish a civil citation process for fare evasion. This would mean citations would no longer be sent to the Superior Court. So big developments there. Look, The metropolitan transit system is one of the areas that comes in most contact with the poorest people in San Diego. And they decided for some reason about 3 or 4 years ago to vastly increase their enforcement of fare evasion. Even though they didn't have any indication that fare evasion was worse here than in other places, they do far disproportionate enforcement here. And the results are very telling. Fascinating story by Lisa Hauerset. I recommend you check that out. What about you? Are you on the trolleys anytime? Do you go to the trolleys, the buses? What's your experience with them? I would like to hear from you. How much did we pay for that law enforcement? Well, great question. I've got some of those figures. I'll look to go into that. Jim, appreciate the question. We do have that somewhere handy. I don't have it off the tip of my tongue, but they did decide. Now, what's interesting is MTS doesn't use police officers, sworn police officers. They use a security firm, and it's a private contractor. And so a lot of the police officers union don't defend that group, but they've been accused of brutality and other things. It's a fascinating moment. All right, so check that out. Lisa did a great job reporting on that. All right, next, let's see, next story I wanted to highlight. So we did a story this week about the Democratic Party. So I do the politics report every every Saturday with Andrew Keats. When we try to round up political news. This week, we focused on the San Diego County Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is led by Will Rodriguez Kennedy. He's the chairman. So the Democratic Party this week put out a slew of resolutions about police actions, police brutality, police reforms they want to see. And it included this resolution. Check this out. This was fascinating if you care about local politics. It said, quote, "Be it resolved that the San Diego County Democratic Party shall refuse all donations from law enforcement unions and associations and demands that all San Diego Democratic elected officials refuse such contributions as well and reject the endorsement of such associations." Read that last part again. And reject the endorsement of those associations. Well, that's a big deal because some of the party's biggest stars, Assemblyman Todd Gloria is running for mayor. He's the endorsed Democratic candidate for mayor against the other Democrat, Barbara Bree, who does not have the party's support. So that means they're demanding that Todd Gloria reject that endorsement. Fascinating moment. Nathan Fletcher, famously, of course, a couple years ago, running for county supervisor as a Democrat, he got the endorsement of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. They had first endorsed Bonnie DeMantis, the former district attorney. They switched to Nathan Fletcher after he shows such a positive outcome in the primary for himself. So would he have to reject that donation? Raul Campillo, running for city council from District 7 of the San Diego City Council. If you don't know, is that area of Tierra Santa, San Carlos, the north of the college area there. So are they saying do not accept or reject that? I asked Will Rodriguez Kennedy that, and he gave me an interesting quote. He said, quote, "So are you asking?" I said, "Are you asking them to demand that they reject those endorsements?" He said, quote, "From my perspective, that could easily be just not promoting an endorsement. There's no reason to submit a rejection of the actual endorsement. So they can endorse you, you just don't acknowledge it. If an organization is going to endorse someone, we can't control what that organization is going to do, but we can control what we do and what we say is part of our values." Well, if you check out Todd Gloria's campaign for mayor, his website still has prominently displayed the endorsement of the political team at the Police Officers Association, San Diego Police Officers Association. Raul Campillo also celebrates that endorsement. So Mara Elliott, San Diego City Attorney, has that endorsement as well. Very unclear what they're going to try to do. The Republicans were almost excited to see this, baffled by that decision. Stephen Pitts, who is a Republican consultant locally, Also, a former chief of staff of the mayor, he said, quote, they've put their candidates in an impossible position of tacitly agreeing with these extreme positions like, quote, defunding police or speaking out and risk being stripped of their coveted party endorsement. And he says here, we've been able to work with the union and police and the mayor and Republicans and Democrats to bring about reforms. So again, a fascinating moment for the Democrats as Will Rodriguez Kennedy, who also, remember, he had the coronavirus. He's been a really interesting leader at the Democratic Party, really got them focused on weighing in on actual policies of the day. They also weighed in on that MTS issue I was talking about enforcement. So before I move on, let's check if there's any. Hello, how are you? Thanks for joining. Lisa's story was great, and yes, she was. She's a great reporter. She's always covering the people with the least amount of voice in the community, and does a great job of that. Homelessness and MTS fare evasion, the latest one. All right. So speaking of reforms, we've been talking at the city of San Diego about one particular reform that is going forward with regard to police. For several years, activists have been trying to get a truly independent oversight commission for police in San Diego, one that would be staffed with independent members of the community, and then also would have its own independent lawyer, and B, subpoena power, so that they would be able to do investigations separate from what the internal affairs investigations of police misconduct reveal. And then they could do their own enforcement effort out of that. As the activists point out, that subpoena power probably would very rarely, if ever, be used. It would just sort of set the bottom line of what's expected as far as cooperation. So if you know you have subpoena power, you don't necessarily need to use it to get somebody to talk to you. So it's a really interesting moment for that. So that has to be a ballot measure. The police chief and the mayor, of course, a couple weeks ago endorsed it, which I never thought I would see. They endorsed it. And the union came out. The union didn't endorse it, but did say, okay, this is what we can live with, basically. They signed off on the negotiations. And so that went forward. And so now it's going to be on the ballot. And we learned today, or learned this weekend, Andrea St. Julian, she's the co-chair of San Diegans for Justice and a prominent lawyer. She said that she was happy with the language. They finally did release the language that came out. She said, at this point, we don't have any objections to the language. We are happy that it's language we think will be useful and helpful for the commission. We don't have any objections, so bring on the vote. Fascinating moment for that. Going to be November of this year. Your ballot is going to be chock full of interesting questions, and included on there, if you live in the city of San Diego, is whether to sign off on this independent police commission, which will have the power to independently investigate police misconduct or allegations. And that is going forward. So we did have an update on that in a way. So our reporter, Andrew Keats, he's fine. Friend of mine, Andrew Keats, he did a piece today comparing the criminal justice approach of both Todd Gloria and Barbara Bree. Now, Barbara Bree, again, Todd Gloria has routed her on all of the major endorsements, from the police officers union to the other unions to all these, the Democratic Party, to Labor. All these groups have endorsed Todd Gloria for mayor, but the police officers also did. And one area that Barbara Bree does have some support is in the Black community among, for instance, the woman who ran for district attorney, Genevieve Jones-Wright, supports Barbara Bree. She said, look, she didn't understand personally what our community has faced, but she listened to us as humans and then understood it was better for all of San Diego. For me, I don't care what color you are. If you're silent on issues that need to be addressed, I cannot support you. And so she was talking in part, and Andrea St. Julian also made a point about Todd Gloria's lack of support for that commission we were just talking about. Andrea St. Julian said, for example, Todd Gloria was really the lead council member who took that charter amendment, gutted it, and instead did little more than change the review board's name when that effort first came up to change that commission. So there's a little bit of hard feelings there. On the other side, Barbara Bree, who's been running for mayor, she's been attacking Todd Gloria for not more quickly jumping on to support Shirley Weber's bill AB 392. Now, AB 392 was the one that said that officers have to have they if they want to get um, if they use lethal force, they have to prove that it's necessary, that it was necessary, not just that it was somehow justified or whatever, but that it was necessary to use it. That was a major change, the first clarification of that law for like 100 years. And so she worked really hard to get that done. She ended up doing a big compromise with the police officers union and a lot of people in the legislature. It got almost unanimous support in the legislature. But Barbara Breed's been hammering Todd Gloria for not supporting it until it was, quote, watered down as they removed some of those justification of what would cause it to be necessary. So we asked, so Andy Keats asked Shirley Weber, you can check this out on his great piece today on voicesandiego.org about the mayor's race. Asked, you know, asked Shirley Weber, was Todd Gloria with you or not? And she said, quote, Todd Gloria was on this bill from day one. I talked to Barbara Bree and she was wibble wobble. Okay. Did I know her? I had her support from the beginning. This is Shirley Weber about Barbara Bree. Did I know I had her support from the beginning? No. She supported it in the end? Yes. Did she vote for it before Todd? Yes, but that doesn't make her a supporter before because of the circumstances of how this occurred. We had not taken it to the floor for the vote. It's a pretty petty thing to try to imply that I was first to support it and he was not, and he wasn't supportive, and now he had only jumped on it when it was watered down and da-da-da-da. That's petty. So she's basically saying, she told a story about how she had to really work to get Barbara Bree on for that measure. So that is a moment to consider in this criminal justice discussion. Let's take some comments. We're talking about earlier. This is a comment reflection of MTS, the Metropolitan Transit System. Jeff says, let's go further. I'm for just not having fares. Well, I think that's a position a lot of people would have, but you know, they do get a significant amount of their budget from fares right now, so they'd have to make that up somewhere. All right. All right. Well, we're going to have just a quick show today. We've got, I got a special guest for Wednesday. You guys remember Zachary Patterson. He's the board member on the San Diego Unified School District Board of Education, but he's the one who represents the students. And so I'm going to bring him on, talk about it, get a student's perspective. He was the star, I think, of the meeting last week where San Diego Unified School District put out their proposal about what they're going to or thinking about doing for all of these reopenings of schools. And they said, remember, notoriously in there, they said, we won't have enough money to finish the year. We won't have enough money to finish the year unless the federal government gives us a massive infusion of cash. And so he raises his hand and they're like about to cut away from him. And he's like, wait, I got something to say. And he's like, hey, can you tell us what certainty you have that the federal government's going to give us that infusion? Because I have a real hard time going back to my colleagues and friends saying like, hey, we need to go back to school. But about halfway through the year, they're going to pull the rug out from under you. Fascinating moment in local in the San Diego Unified School District. We're going to have Zachary on to talk about what it's been like as a high school student, what his friends are saying. And I want to ask him about masks. I have a 14-year-old here in, she's going to high school next year. And I asked her, I said, so do you think the cool kids will be wearing masks and that'll be like the peer pressure will be to wear masks? Or do you think that the kids won't be wearing masks and that'll be the pressure? So any kid that has it will be pressured. And she said, well, I think that the good kids will probably be wearing masks. And I joked like, oh, so you then, because you're a good kid, you'll be in them. So that'll be, I joke, but I think what they say about masks and then enforcing masks is going to be a huge discussion. If you say everybody has to wear masks, what's going to happen when you start to have kids not wearing masks, and how disproportionately are they going to enforce the rules? You're going to send cops after kids in some parts of the area, or are you going to send, you know, warning letters to kids in other parts of the area? It's going to be fascinating to watch that, and I encourage everybody to have some clarity about how that's going to work, because that could get really messy. Um, so I want to hear from you. Are you going to go back to school? You saw San Diego Unified say you can stay remote, or you can go back to class in 5 days a week with a lot of these modifications, the masks, some partitions, some other rules like that, temperature checks. You going to go back to school, or are you going to stay remote? And if you stay remote, are you going to try to look for one of those more evolved homeschool platforms, or are you going to just see what the districts do for you? I'm really interested in this question. We're going to be following it really closely. Okay, so stick around for Wednesday. We got Zachary Patterson, and I've also booked for next week. I've got Corey Briggs coming on. He's running for city attorney against Maura Elliott. We've had Maura on this show before. Who would you like to see on these events and these discussions? Who would you like to see questions asked of? Who, all these questions I think are really interesting. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. That was just a short version this week. We will dive right in with Zachary Patterson on Wednesday, and then we got a lot more to discuss with the podcast. You can follow everything. I encourage you to follow Voice of San Diego. Let's check out what's going on there, so you can understand what we're doing. Let's see. So this is the site right now. We still have that testing tracker up there. Look at that. Their tests performed are well above what we wanted them to be, what we were hoping they would get to. That's what they said their goal was. Look at that capacity. They could be testing kids and educators, it seems like, aren't planning on doing that. Here's that story from Andrew Keats about the criminal justice issues in the mayor's race. We've also got a discussion about the district attorney and its own police reforms, and how some experts say they don't go far enough. And here's that story about MTS. Fascinating investigation into just 1 week of what happens to fare evasion tickets. And I also recommend highly this week's What We Learned This Week from Sarah Libby. She wraps up the stories every week in a newsletter that goes out, What We Learned This Week, on Sundays. That was a particularly good one. And then, of course, our politics report on Saturday. So check those out. You can always get and follow Voice of San Diego. The best way to do that is with the morning report at voiceofsandiego.org. Sign up for that, and that's really the best way to follow things. And really appreciate your support, and thanks for coming on again. And take a second to let us know if there's anything else we should be investigating or explaining. And we'll be back here at Voice of San Diego at Home on Wednesday. Cheers.